You won't believe what Prince Harry just heard. Secret recordings of Meghan Markle screaming at royal staff have surfaced, and King Charles is finally speaking out. After months of silence, King Charles has released an explosive internal report, backed by unreleased footage and damning audio, that has left Prince Harry reeling. The revelations? Meghan Markle allegedly berating royal aides over trivial matters, caught on tape in shocking detail. What sparked this sudden exposure? Why now? And how deep does this go? In this urgent special report, we uncover leaked clips, emotional fallout behind palace walls, and the real reason Prince Harry is questioning everything. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. He had always been the silent one, the loyal son, the exiled prince who chose love over duty, exile over conformity. But on this particular morning, Prince Harry sat frozen, eyes locked on a private screen inside his Montecito home, where a trusted aide had just shown him something no one thought the world would ever see. Not a tabloid rumor, not a whisper in the halls of the palace. Actual evidence. Raw, undeniable, and damning. Audio, video, paper trails, names, dates, and worst of all, her voice. The voice of Meghan Markle, his wife, caught in a series of explosive recordings, berating palace aides over issues that sounded, to most people, utterly insignificant. One clip featured Meghan reportedly screaming about the wrong floral arrangements for an event she barely attended. Another, far darker, captured her tearing into a junior aide who had forgotten to forward an email in time. The language was harsh, the tone cold and aggressive, and the emotional wreckage left behind, according to the palace's internal findings, was severe enough to drive at least 2 staff members into therapy. For Prince Harry, the man who had once gone to war, who had walked behind his mother's casket with a stiff upper lip and bleeding heart, this revelation was war of another kind, internal, personal, and emotionally catastrophic. And the man who had authorized its release? None other than his own father, King Charles III. The story had been brewing for years. Hidden beneath layers of royal diplomacy, non-disclosure agreements, sealed HR complaints, and the invisible armor of the crown, it was a scandal known only to a select few. Those in the palace whispered. Staff turned over. Rumors trickled into the media, only to be snuffed out by clever PR or denied altogether. Yet behind closed doors, the pressure had been building. There had been investigations, internal memos, even quiet interventions. But no one, not even Harry himself, had expected King Charles to go public. And yet, here it was, a massive internal report, compiled with months of testimony, corroborated timelines, and now, leaked footage and audio files that left nothing to the imagination. King Charles, usually reserved and cautious, had broken ranks with the tradition of silence that the monarchy lived and died by. He had decided, in what some are calling a strategic move to save the monarchy's long-term reputation, to finally acknowledge what many feared was true, that Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, had allegedly engaged in a pattern of bullying and emotional manipulation while serving as a senior member of the royal family. To understand the weight of this moment, you have to step back and consider how it all began. The arrival of Meghan into the royal fold had been hailed as a breath of fresh air. Young, intelligent, independent, she was everything the monarchy needed to rebrand itself in a rapidly changing world. The wedding was a spectacle. The coverage, glowing. For a time, it seemed like the royal family had embraced modernity and Meghan had found her fairy tale. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. It started quietly. A leaked complaint here. An anonymous source there. Difficult to work with, one headline had whispered. Demanding, said another. But defenders dismissed it all as media bias, perhaps even racism. Meghan herself pushed back, claiming she had been the victim of institutional neglect and targeted by both the press and palace machinery. Her 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey sent shockwaves across the globe. Tears. Accusations. The infamous quote, "There were concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born," fueled debates for months. Support for Meghan and Harry grew among certain demographics. But inside the palace, something else was happening. Quiet inquiries. Internal probes. People who had remained silent for years began to talk, often anonymously, but with frightening consistency. Aides reported emotional breakdowns, sudden resignations, and a work culture they described as toxic under Meghan's leadership. Still, nothing official was ever said. The palace, true to its age-old motto, never complain, never explain, kept its lips sealed. Until now. And the timing? Impeccable or deliberate, depending on whom you ask. Just as public trust in the monarchy faced renewed scrutiny in the wake of global shifts toward transparency, and just as Charles stepped fully into his role as king following his mother's death, he made a decision to clear the air. But rather than issuing a simple statement, he greenlit the release of a 200-page internal dossier that detailed every grievance, every account, and, most damaging of all, attached transcripts and time-stamped audio clips of Meghan's interactions with palace staff. The backlash was instant. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #RoyalReckoning and #MeghanTapes began trending within hours. Pundits across political and cultural lines debated whether this was justice, revenge, or a royal cover-up backfiring. And in the middle of it all stood Prince Harry, heartbroken, blindsided, and reportedly silent. People close to him say the tapes changed everything. This was no longer about media narratives or family rifts. It was about proof. About facing the possibility that the woman he had risked everything for, the mother of his children, his soulmate, might not be who he thought she was. And worse, that his family had known this all along and chosen not to tell him. Or perhaps tried, and he simply hadn't listened. There are reports, still unconfirmed, that Harry tried to block the release. That he called his father in desperation. That Charles refused to back down. The question now isn't whether Meghan's behavior was questionable. That seems settled in the court of public opinion. The real question is, why now? What drove King Charles to speak out? What role did Prince William and Princess Anne play behind the scenes? Was Queen Camilla part of this decision? And what does it mean for the future of the Sussexes, for their Archewell brand, for their Netflix empire, and most importantly, for the children caught in the middle of a media storm that threatens to swallow them whole? This is not just a scandal. It's a turning point. In the next several chapters, we're going to break down everything, line by line, tape by tape, testimony by testimony. We'll show you how this investigation came to be, who pushed for it, who tried to stop it, and how the shocking revelations are reshaping the way the public views Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, and the entire House of Windsor. We'll take you inside the war rooms of royal advisors, the hushed interviews of former palace staff, and the echo chamber of online discourse that has turned this private crisis into an international spectacle. If you think you know what happened, think again. This story is only beginning. It was a document no one outside the inner circle was ever meant to see. A report so sensitive it was originally commissioned under royal confidentiality orders, stored not in a standard government archive, but in a restricted access digital vault overseen by Buckingham Palace's senior legal counsel. And yet, there it was, leaked, partially redacted, but undeniably authentic. The internal report that laid bare the chaos that unfolded during Meghan Markle's tenure as a working royal. Compiled over 18 months, this report was not simply a reaction to tabloid hysteria or media gossip. It was the result of persistent internal unrest within the royal household. Aides, staffers, private secretaries, and even contractors had begun voicing concerns, quietly at first, but then with increasing urgency. Their claims were not about optics or politics. They spoke of trauma, emotional abuse, a culture of intimidation. The report began with a statement that set the tone for everything that followed. It is the responsibility of this institution to ensure the dignity and welfare of those who serve it. That line, brief but potent, signaled that this was not a witch hunt. It was an inquiry meant to uphold the integrity of the monarchy as an employer and guardian of tradition. More than 40 current and former staff members were interviewed under conditions of anonymity. Some interviews were conducted via encrypted channels to protect the identities of participants. Others were conducted face-to-face, under oath. The report included direct transcripts of these interviews, carefully cross-referenced with calendar entries, internal emails, CCTV logs, and HR incident reports. One former staffer described the atmosphere in the Sussex household as a pressure cooker ready to explode. She recounted an instance in which Meghan allegedly berated a junior staff member for failing to print briefing documents in her preferred font, Times New Roman instead of Garamond. According to the aide, Meghan's tone was not just firm, but viciously cold. The staffer later requested reassignment to a different department and reportedly experienced severe anxiety attacks. Another entry revealed a previously unknown confrontation between Meghan and a senior scheduler. The dispute was over a charity event in Nottingham. Meghan reportedly wanted a specific media outlet excluded from press access, which would have violated royal protocol. When the aide tried to explain, Meghan allegedly slammed a folder on the table and stormed out, later instructing a third party to have the aide removed immediately. These were not isolated anecdotes. The report identified a pattern. Multiple staffers echoed a consistent narrative, demands delivered with zero flexibility, emails sent at 5 a.m. with expectations of immediate response and emotional blowback if tasks were not executed exactly to Meghan's satisfaction. One assistant quit after just 11 weeks. Another cited insomnia and workplace-induced depression, later confirmed by their physician. The investigation also traced a sudden spike in HR filings during the period between September 2018 and March 2019. That 6-month window coincided with Meghan's most active months in royal engagements, during which she and Harry undertook a high-profile tour of Oceania and launched several charitable initiatives. While the public saw smiles and glowing headlines, inside the palace, complaints were piling up. The report noted that 5 aides either resigned or formally requested transfers within that span. A confidential memorandum included in the report was particularly damning. Written by a senior HR director and dated February 2019, it outlined escalating patterns of verbal hostility and erratic expectations, and urged immediate intervention. The memo was addressed to Sir Edward Young, the Queen's private secretary at the time, and CC'd to then Prince Charles's chief of staff. No action was taken, at least not publicly. Perhaps the most haunting element of the report was not the incidents themselves, but the language used by those affected. Terms like humiliated, broken, worthless, and constantly walking on eggshells appeared repeatedly. One particularly detailed testimony read, "It wasn't about performance. It was about dominance. Nothing you did was ever enough. And if you failed to anticipate her mood, you paid for it." The report also investigated the dismissal of a royal protection officer, which had made headlines at the time but was never explained. According to the findings, the officer had intervened in an escalating confrontation between Meghan and a travel liaison officer. The officer reportedly attempted to de-escalate the situation and was later removed from the Sussex's detail without formal justification. Palace security officials deemed the reassignment irregular and politically motivated. While some defenders of Meghan within the palace insisted she was under immense pressure from the media and public expectations, the report repeatedly noted that high pressure did not excuse consistent mistreatment of subordinates. One royal insider was quoted saying, "We have all been under scrutiny. We have all had bad days. But there is a line and she crossed it." Repeatedly. The scope of the investigation extended to the use of NDAs. Several staff members had signed strict non-disclosure agreements upon their hiring, and a few were reminded of these legal bindings after lodging internal complaints. However, the report found that such reminders may have constituted implicit intimidation, effectively silencing whistleblowers. Legal advisors urged a review of HR policies to ensure future staff protections. A brief but significant section of the report addressed Meghan's defenders, citing instances where colleagues praised her intellect, work ethic, and charisma. But even those favorable statements were tempered by acknowledgments of unpredictable temperament and difficulty with authority structures. Interestingly, the report did not recommend any disciplinary action against Meghan. Instead, it advised a systemic overhaul, greater mental health resources for staff, clear escalation protocols for grievances, and a shift in how senior royals interact with their teams. However, King Charles's decision to speak publicly and authorize partial disclosure of the findings far exceeded the report's original recommendations. The final paragraph of the executive summary was chilling in its restraint. It is the view of this inquiry that the events herein, if left unaddressed, present a long-term risk to institutional trust and stability. To those within the palace, those words were not just an assessment, they were a verdict. From the outside, Meghan Markle appeared to be the modern royal the monarchy needed, an articulate, socially aware, and confident woman who symbolized change in a centuries-old institution. But behind the gates of Kensington Palace, staff tell a dramatically different story. According to the claims compiled in the internal palace report and subsequent leaks, Meghan's day-to-day behavior toward her team was not only difficult, but deeply damaging. The first wave of complaints began quietly. Aides initially chalked up the tension to cultural differences or the natural adjustment period expected of someone entering such a rigid system. But within weeks of Meghan's arrival into full royal duties, the atmosphere within her staff reportedly shifted. Those closest to her began to speak of fear, volatility, and intense emotional pressure. One aide, who had previously worked with other senior royals, described Meghan as the most demanding principal I've ever served. She explained that what made working for Meghan so taxing was not simply the volume of requests but the emotional intensity tied to each one. There were no small errors, she said. If you got something wrong, even if it was a minor oversight, you weren't just corrected, you were punished. Multiple staff members echoed similar sentiments. A private secretary who worked during the Sussex's tour of Australia recalled what she called an emotionally scarring experience. According to her account, Meghan erupted in rage after discovering that her suite did not have the correct brand of bottled water she preferred. It wasn't just disappointment, the secretary recalled. It was rage. She accused me of sabotaging her image, of disrespect, of incompetence. I was humiliated in front of other staff. The report highlighted that these types of confrontations were rarely isolated. Rather, they formed a recognizable pattern. Meghan would allegedly focus intently on trivial matters, often elevating them to matters of loyalty or betrayal. A forgotten email, a delay in delivery, or a misstep in phrasing during press interactions would result in full-blown outbursts. The staff began to refer to her behavior as walking into a storm cloud without warning. Some staff members adopted internal coping strategies, such as texting each other warnings before meetings, using code words to indicate Meghan's mood that day. One aide confessed, "We would say things like she's on the warpath, or it's a red level day. That was the only way we could prepare ourselves mentally." Particularly damaging were Meghan's alleged confrontations with junior staff, some of whom had little experience and no power to push back. The report contained accounts of her allegedly belittling a new communications assistant for misprinting a press schedule, reportedly saying, "If this is your level of work, you don't belong here." Another staffer, only weeks into the job, recounted being reduced to tears after being told she had embarrassed the Duchess in a minor seating chart error for a lunch event. Even more troubling was the frequency with which these incidents reportedly occurred behind closed doors. Meghan would often call aides into her private office or quarters for informal reviews. Several of these meetings, according to testimonies, quickly devolved into emotionally charged confrontations, with Meghan reportedly using terms such as incompetent, unworthy, and replaceable. Some insiders noted that Prince Harry was either unaware or in denial of the severity of these exchanges. A high-ranking staff member stated, "Harry never saw the worst of it. Meghan always waited until he wasn't in the room. And when we tried to bring it up, he defended her fiercely. He believed we were exaggerating or being influenced by unconscious bias." Another senior aide, however, suggested a more complicated dynamic. "There were moments," the aide claimed, "when Harry looked at us, just briefly, with an expression that said he knew. But he wouldn't allow himself to confront it." There were also accounts of Meghan allegedly weaponizing her status within the royal family. Several staff members stated that she would reference her title as a means of silencing dissent. "Do you know who I am?" was reportedly a common refrain. According to one account, she once told an event planner who suggested altering her speech, "That's not how duchesses are spoken to. Fix it." In one of the more dramatic incidents detailed in the report, Meghan allegedly ordered the firing of a stylist just hours before a public appearance. The reason? The color coordination of her accessories was said to be unacceptable. The stylist, who had flown in from abroad and worked around the clock for the engagement, was escorted off palace grounds within the hour. No explanation was given to the rest of the staff, but morale plummeted after the event. Another incident, previously unreported until the leak of the dossier, involved a young intern who had prepared briefing notes for a joint Sussex-Cambridge event. Meghan reportedly criticized the intern's phrasing in front of the entire planning committee, called the notes childish, and insisted the intern be reassigned. The intern later withdrew from the program entirely. While the report emphasized that Meghan often followed up her outbursts with strategic charm, a gesture, a compliment, or a gift, it also noted that these reconciliatory moves were seen by many as manipulative rather than sincere. "It was like being gaslit," said one aide. "She'd rip you apart, and then the next day send you flowers. It messed with our heads." Interestingly, the report also referenced Meghan's use of external advisors and personal consultants, many of whom were unfamiliar with palace protocol. Some staffers felt undermined by this parallel team, especially when Meghan would override established royal procedures based on outside counsel. One scheduling conflict led to the cancellation of an important diplomatic engagement because Meghan reportedly insisted on prioritizing a meeting with a Hollywood executive. Several interviewees speculated that Meghan's behavior was rooted in an intense need for control, perhaps exacerbated by the relentless scrutiny she was under. But others disagreed, pointing out that while many royals faced similar pressures, they did not resort to hostility. "Pressure doesn't create character," said a veteran palace aide. "It reveals it." The report also explored the psychological toll on staff. One employee admitted to seeking professional therapy during the height of the chaos. Another, according to palace logs, was granted an early sabbatical after a documented panic attack during a Sussex press event. At least 2 former aides refused to participate in the report, citing ongoing trauma and legal gag orders. A particularly damning testimony came from a former aide who had previously worked in high-stakes political environments. "I've worked under cabinet ministers, billionaires, and military generals," the aide said. "But I've never felt the level of dread I felt working under her. It wasn't the workload, it was the mood swings, the emotional volatility, the sense that you were never safe from being targeted next." Throughout all this, the common thread wasn't just Meghan's reported behavior, but the growing sense that the palace was unwilling or unable to intervene. Complaints reportedly disappeared into bureaucratic limbo. Staff turnover was quietly managed. Media access was restricted. The institution, desperate to avoid further scandal, chose internal damage control over public accountability. Yet the damage was already done. Even among those who tried to stay neutral, the weight of the claims began to reshape their perception. "At first, I thought it was exaggerated," said one source close to the palace. "But when you hear the same kind of story from 10 different people, across months, with details that line up, it stops being rumor. It becomes reality." This section of the report closed with a sentence that has haunted the palace halls since it leaked. "In the absence of accountability, toxicity becomes tradition." And in this case, the toxicity wasn't systemic. It had a name, a voice, and for the first time, recorded proof. The world had heard whispers. Rumors about mistreatment, about aides resigning in tears, about tensions behind the palace gates. But whispers are easily dismissed, especially in a monarchy skilled at silence. What no one expected was proof. Actual recordings. And when those recordings surfaced, the palace, an institution known for discretion, was forced into the spotlight in the most humiliating way. The first clip was barely 2 minutes long, but it was enough to shatter illusions. In the leaked audio, allegedly captured in late 2018 during a high-level planning session for an upcoming tour, a woman believed to be Meghan Markle is heard speaking sharply to a team of assistants. Her voice, unmistakable to those familiar with her media interviews, cuts through the air with icy precision. She is angry about last-minute changes to a press release. A specific phrase, meant to highlight a charitable partnership, had been altered. The correction was minor, but the reaction was anything but. "You people never listen," the voice says. "Do I have to do everything myself?" There is a pause on the tape. The silence feels heavy, uncomfortable. Then she continues. "I want that fixed now. Not tomorrow. Not later. Now. You had one job." The tone is not just firm. It is laced with condescension and fury. And then, before the clip ends, she allegedly mutters, "I can't believe I'm surrounded by this level of incompetence." The reaction to this single recording was instant. Within hours of it being posted anonymously on a secure whistleblower site, media outlets scrambled for confirmation. The palace refused to comment initially. But behind the scenes, phones were ringing, legal teams were being assembled, and damage control meetings were underway. Then came the second tape. This one was longer. Over 6 minutes of audio, reportedly captured by an aide who had been documenting abusive encounters in case HR refused to intervene. In it, Meghan is heard reprimanding a staffer for delivering the wrong style of folder during an event prep session. What began as a logistical hiccup spiraled into what many described as emotional bullying. "Do you think this is acceptable?" she reportedly asks. The aide tries to respond, voice trembling, but is interrupted. "Don't answer that. You wouldn't know acceptable if it slapped you across the face." She then proceeds to question the aide's background, training, and commitment, before ending the encounter with a chilling phrase. "Get out of my sight." These were not dramatizations. They were not anonymous accusations buried in tabloids. These were real moments, captured in real time, by people who had worked for her, who had stayed silent until now. The authenticity of the recordings became the immediate focus. Audio specialists were brought in by several media houses. Digital waveform analyses confirmed no sign of editing or manipulation. Voice recognition experts from private firms stated with high probability that the voice was indeed Meghan's. Several of the palace staff who had been present during the events also confirmed the context, though most refused to speak publicly. Once the tapes were verified, the pressure on Buckingham Palace mounted. The public wanted a response. Critics accused the institution of long-term cover-ups. Royalists were divided. Some saw the leaks as a betrayal, others as necessary justice. The monarchy, famously reluctant to address internal affairs in public, found itself backed into a corner. And then, the unthinkable happened. The palace acknowledged the recordings. Through a carefully worded statement released by the Lord Chamberlain's office, the monarchy admitted that the clips were part of an internal staff investigation and had been stored as evidence during the initial HR review. The palace called the leaks deeply regrettable, but did not deny their contents. King Charles, according to sources close to the situation, was disappointed but not surprised. What raised eyebrows even further was the leak's origin. Multiple insiders suggested the recordings were not stolen by hackers or obtained illegally, but released intentionally by someone within the palace network, someone with high-level access and a personal stake in the truth being revealed. The third leak wasn't an audio file. It was video, grainy and taken from what appeared to be a security camera within a private palace corridor. The footage showed a moment of confrontation between Meghan and a young aide carrying a laptop and documents. There's no sound, but Meghan's body language. Sharp gestures, pointed finger, tight jaw, tells its own story. The aide appears visibly shaken, retreating backwards before Meghan turns and storms away. The footage made headlines across the world. Within days, all three clips had gone viral. News anchors dissected every frame. Body language experts weighed in. Social commentators debated whether this was an example of a woman unfairly criticized for assertiveness or a legitimate case of workplace abuse. Hashtags flooded social media. Supporters of Meghan claimed the leaks were targeted revenge. Detractors argued it was proof that the media narrative of victimhood had been carefully crafted. Amid the storm, Meghan's legal team issued a response. It did not deny that the voice in the recordings was hers, but it argued that the clips were taken out of context, recorded without consent, and did not reflect the full nature of the interactions. The statement suggested that Meghan had been under intense pressure and that moments of frustration had been cherry-picked to damage her reputation. The team also warned against further publication of private material and hinted at legal action. But the damage had already been done. In the days following the leaks, several former aides came forward, some anonymously, some on record, confirming the climate of fear described in the tapes. One ex-staffer told a major publication, "Listening to those tapes was like being transported back to those days. It was real. Every word. Every tone. She knew exactly what she was doing." The recordings did more than just validate the palace report. They made it impossible to ignore. Before the leaks, there had been plausible deniability. Meghan's defenders could claim that complaints were exaggerated, or that they stemmed from jealousy or racism. After the tapes, such claims became harder to sustain. Even Prince Harry, according to insiders, was rattled. One friend reported that Harry refused to speak publicly for several days after hearing the tapes. Another said he was devastated and reportedly confronted palace staff to ask why he had never been shown the material earlier. Whether or not he had seen or heard them before remains uncertain. Some insiders say he was deliberately shielded to preserve his loyalty to Meghan. Others suggest he chose not to believe the claims until the evidence was unavoidable. The fallout wasn't confined to the royal family. Sponsors began backing away from Archewell, the nonprofit founded by Harry and Meghan. A Netflix representative was quoted anonymously saying the partnership was under active review. Archewell's website saw a dramatic spike in negative traffic. Even longtime allies in Hollywood became quiet. The palace, for its part, has remained mostly silent beyond the initial statement. But several royal sources hinted that the leaks may have come with the blessing of high-ranking family members frustrated by years of turmoil. Some speculated that the royal push came from Princess Anne, known for her no-nonsense stance on royal duty. Others suggested that King Charles himself, weary from ongoing drama, finally chose transparency over tradition. Whatever the source, the result was clear. The veil had been lifted. The recordings painted a picture of a workplace poisoned by tension, intimidation, and psychological manipulation. They stripped away the curated public persona and exposed something raw, unsettling, and deeply damaging. More than a scandal, The tapes marked a turning point. No longer could the issues surrounding Meghan Markle be dismissed as mere gossip. The monarchy's silence had been replaced with the sound of her own voice, angry, sharp, undeniable. The silence from Prince Harry was deafening. In the days following the leak of the report and accompanying recordings, the media swarmed for a statement. But Harry, once a fiery defender of his wife against all things royal and press-related, said nothing. No tweet, no press release, no Instagram post. He was uncharacteristically absent from the couple's Archwell updates. His name, for the first time in a long time, was no longer at the forefront of the royal war. It was as if the man who had once declared war on the institution that raised him had suddenly lost his voice. But behind the scenes, sources suggest the silence wasn't calculated, it was shock. Pure, unfiltered disbelief. According to one insider close to the Sussex household, Harry first heard about the recordings from a trusted member of his own team, not from the palace. The aide, understanding the volatility of the material, didn't show him immediately. Instead, they described its contents carefully, testing his reaction. At first, Harry reportedly dismissed it. He believed it was another smear campaign, more manipulative editing, another attack designed to break them down and exploit their vulnerability. He had heard it all before. The racist headlines, the vicious commentary, the threats, the institutional coldness. So naturally, he assumed this was more of the same. But when he finally sat down to watch and listen to the recordings, something shifted. According to multiple accounts, Harry's face went pale. He asked for the clip to be paused, then replayed, then paused again. There was a long silence. Then another request, "Can you play it one more time?" One former friend described that moment as the unraveling of Harry's trust. He had believed in Meghan so fully, so completely, that he had built a life around defending her from what he believed was coordinated abuse. He cut ties with his family. He gave up military appointments. He moved across the world. But now, the very thing he had fought so hard to reject, the royal machine and its warnings, was staring back at him with the undeniable clarity of recorded truth. It wasn't that Harry hadn't heard complaints before. Aides had tried to raise concerns in the past. Even Prince William had, at one point, reportedly warned him that Meghan's treatment of staff was not sustainable. But Harry, fiercely protective and traumatized by what he saw as history repeating itself, dismissed those warnings as institutional racism or jealousy. He had made it his mission to shield Meghan from the fate that befell his mother. In doing so, he blinded himself to the possibility that his wife might not be entirely innocent. This new evidence, cold, impartial, unedited, was too much to ignore. Sources inside Montecito say Harry retreated into himself. He canceled meetings, skipped calls, avoided public appearances. One report claimed he spent hours walking alone along the coast near his home, often returning disheveled, eyes red. Another said he stopped answering calls from his father and brother, unsure of what to say. The betrayal wasn't just from Meghan, it was from himself. He had staked everything on a version of the truth that was now collapsing. One close acquaintance said bluntly he didn't know who to believe anymore. He felt like a fool. In moments of private rage, Harry reportedly asked aides why they hadn't insisted he listen to these complaints earlier. One longtime employee allegedly responded, "We tried. You didn't want to hear it." That line, according to palace sources, gutted him. The worst part, several insiders claimed, was that Harry felt trapped. Speaking out against the report or the recordings would make him appear complicit in excusing bad behavior. Acknowledging them would be a betrayal of the woman he loves and the mother of his children. There was no safe choice. Only consequences. Even within the Sussex inner circle, tensions rose. Several team members reportedly considered resigning. Trust within the Archwell Foundation began to fracture. Brand partners expressed concern about whether Meghan should remain the public face of the organization. Harry, caught in the crossfire, had to act as a buffer, except this time, he didn't know whom he was buffering against. According to a source familiar with internal Archwell meetings, Harry attempted to launch a review of the Foundation's staff welfare protocols, quietly distancing himself from previous decision-making structures. Some saw it as an admission. Others saw it as too little, too late. For Harry, the question wasn't just whether Meghan had behaved badly, it was whether he had become a bystander to abuse. A man who, in his pursuit of love, ignored the cries of those around him. He had once said in interviews that staying silent in the face of wrongdoing was complicity. That quote, now resurfacing across social media, was being used against him. The royal family, for its part, remained cold. Charles offered no personal outreach, at least not publicly. William was said to be deeply saddened but not surprised. And, ever the pragmatist, reportedly refused to comment but privately expressed satisfaction that the truth had come out. Even Queen Camilla, whom Meghan had once accused of leaking stories to the press, was silent. For Harry, this meant he was alone, rejected by the family he left behind, and now questioning the foundation of the one he had chosen. Friends close to him say his relationship with Meghan grew tense in the days after the recording surfaced. The couple, once united against a common enemy, now had a wall between them. Meghan, adamant that the tapes were selectively edited, stood her ground. Harry, meanwhile, asked questions. Real questions. The kind that had gone unspoken for years. Did you really say that? Were you aware how much damage that caused? Why didn't you tell me the truth about how staff were treated? No answers were satisfactory. The trust was fraying. Observers began speculating about the future of their relationship. Would this break them? Could they recover? Was the fairy tale crumbling into something darker? So far, there is no definitive answer. Publicly, they remain united. Privately, the cracks are growing. What remains clear is this: the recordings changed Harry. He is quieter now, less sure, less inclined to speak out with the same confidence. The man who once boldly told Oprah that history was repeating itself now finds himself facing a different kind of legacy. The fear that in protecting his wife, he had become complicit in hurting others. For decades, King Charles lived under the rule of restraint, trained from childhood to maintain composure under pressure, to never let emotion dictate action, to prioritize the crown over personal feeling. But even the most disciplined men have breaking points. And for Charles, the breaking point came not with a dramatic betrayal or catastrophic crisis, but with a growing, silent rot within the family he had tried so hard to preserve. It was not an impulsive decision. The release of the palace report detailing Meghan Markle's alleged bullying of royal aides, along with the authorization to acknowledge the authenticity of the leaked recordings, was calculated, deliberate, and executed with strategic precision. Those close to King Charles say it was months in the making, maybe even years. But why now? To understand Charles's decision, you have to first understand his dilemma. Since becoming king, Charles has had to balance competing demands, uphold the dignity of the crown, repair fractured family relationships, and modernize an institution increasingly out of touch with public sentiment. The death of Queen Elizabeth left him not just a throne, but a ticking time bomb of unresolved scandals and tensions. And chief among them was Harry and Meghan. Their exit in 2020 had already left deep scars. Their subsequent interviews, documentaries, and public speeches, many of which painted the royal family as cold, uncaring, or even racist, had done lasting reputational damage. But Charles, ever cautious, chose silence. He believed the fire would burn itself out, that with time, things would settle. They didn't. Instead, the narrative hardened. Harry and Meghan, from their Montecito perch, controlled the media lens through which millions viewed the monarchy. With every headline they generated, public trust in the royal institution dipped a little more. And within the palace walls, staff morale plummeted. Aides felt abandoned. Senior advisors urged Charles to act. But still, he waited. Then came the tipping point, the internal report. Commissioned quietly after multiple staff resignations, the report laid bare a pattern of behavior that could no longer be dismissed as rumors. It included direct quotes, dates, evidence. And worse, it exposed a pattern of HR suppression, complaints buried, whistleblowers discouraged, non-disclosure agreements used as shields. The palace had known, and done little. Charles was faced with a brutal question. Would he continue the royal tradition of denial, or would he risk exposing the truth? Those closest to him say the decision tormented him, not just because it involved his son and daughter-in-law, but because it revealed an institutional failure under his watch. Charles had always seen himself as a reformer. He had streamlined the monarchy, trimmed its excesses, and focused on key national duties. But this scandal wasn't about protocol or money. It was about people who felt abused, unheard, and discarded. One senior advisor described the atmosphere in the days leading up to the report's release as tense and uncertain. Charles held private consultations with legal teams, HR officers, senior royals, and communications experts. The risk was enormous. By acknowledging the findings, he would confirm years of speculation and invite a media storm. But if he stayed silent, the institution would appear complicit. And then came the leak. The recordings changed everything. They transformed the issue from internal speculation to public crisis. Once the audio and footage surfaced, silence was no longer a viable option. The world demanded answers. And so, Charles acted. But rather than respond through a press conference or personal statement, he chose a subtle, devastatingly effective method: palace confirmation. By authorizing a senior official to confirm the validity of the report and its contents, Charles sent a clear message. He would no longer protect reputations at the expense of truth. Insiders say Charles was particularly disturbed by one part of the report, a section detailing the emotional breakdown of a young aide following an encounter with Meghan. The aide had reportedly confided in HR that they felt unworthy of life after weeks of beratement. For Charles, a man who had long battled his own emotional demons, this was the moment that broke him. He realized that silence was no longer noble. It was dangerous. There were also strategic motivations. The monarchy was facing mounting pressure from the public to demonstrate transparency and modern accountability. Charles, aware of how fast public opinion could shift in a digital age, knew that denying the truth would only make things worse. By confirming the findings, he could regain some control over the narrative and position himself as a monarch unafraid of difficult truths. His decision also served a subtle yet powerful purpose: reclaiming the crown's authority. For years, Harry and Meghan had set the tempo of the family's public image. They had dictated interviews, released documentaries, and written memoirs. Every attempt to respond had been dismissed as defensive or outdated. But this time, Charles flipped the script. He didn't accuse. He didn't attack. He presented evidence, cold, impartial, and verifiable. In doing so, he shifted the weight of credibility. There is speculation that Prince William supported the move. Though known for his discretion, William has always been protective of palace staff, many of whom work closely with both brothers. According to one aide, William believed the truth had been buried too long and reportedly pushed for Charles to take a stand. Queen Camilla, too, was said to be in favor. Having faced her own public demonization for years, she understood the importance of reclaiming reputation through facts, not spin. She is said to have told Charles, "We can't afford to be silent anymore. Not if it means more people get hurt." Notably absent from the decision-making process was Prince Harry. Whether by choice or exclusion remains unclear. Some say Charles did attempt to inform him in advance. Others claim Harry was left in the dark, a move designed to prevent obstruction. Either way, the release caught him off guard. Critics argue that Charles should have handled the matter privately, that by confirming the report, he betrayed his son and exposed the family to global embarrassment. But defenders say he had no choice. The monarchy, they argue, is bigger than any individual. And for Charles, whose reign will likely be shorter than his mother's, every decision carries legacy-level consequences. What Charles has done, intentionally or not, is draw a line. The era of secrecy is over. The message is clear. No one is above accountability, not even a duchess. By opening the palace's internal wounds to public scrutiny, he has shown a willingness to evolve, to adapt, to lead. The risk, of course, remains. The fallout is still unfolding. Public opinion is divided. Archewell's future is uncertain. Harry and Meghan's next move is unpredictable. But one thing is certain: Charles is no longer hiding behind protocol. He made a choice. Not for revenge, not for press, but for truth. The British royal family has survived wars, divorces, abdications, and scandal. It has weathered assassinations, betrayals, and decades of public scrutiny. But few events have cut as deeply into the private relationships within the House of Windsor as the fallout from the bullying report and leaked recordings involving Meghan Markle. What was once a simmering tension erupted into full-scale division, brother against brother, father against son, and silence where once there was unity. Inside the palace, alliances began to form long before the public became aware of the scandal. The inner circle of royals, Charles, Camilla, William, and were already divided into factions, some pushing for accountability, others urging discretion. But as the evidence mounted, even those who had hoped for resolution began to take sides. Prince William's position was perhaps the most predictable, but also the most heartbreaking. From the very beginning of Meghan's entry into royal life, William had been skeptical, not of her background or ambition, but of her understanding of royal duty. Those close to him recall a pivotal conversation in late 2017, when William reportedly urged Harry to slow things down before his engagement. At the time, it was seen as brotherly advice. In hindsight, it may have been a warning. Since the Sussexes' departure from royal duties, William maintained a dignified silence. But behind the scenes, he was deeply aware of the growing tension between staff and the Sussex household. Several aides who left Meghan's employ later found refuge working under William and Kate. He listened to their stories. He believed them. According to palace insiders, William was among the first to advocate for a formal inquiry into staff complaints. His reasoning wasn't personal, it was institutional. The royal household, he argued, had a duty to protect its employees, regardless of their rank or whom they served. Staff loyalty had always been the invisible glue of the monarchy. Undermining that loyalty, in his view, risked destroying the institution from within. When the tapes leaked, William's reaction was measured but decisive. He didn't speak publicly, nor did he issue statements. But his demeanor shifted. At one high-level family meeting, sources claim he said, "We've ignored this long enough. It's time we stop pretending it's not happening." Prince, and, as expected, was even more direct. Known within the family for her no-nonsense approach and strong work ethic, and had little patience for drama. She had been one of the few royals who never fully warmed to Meghan, citing what some called an intuitive distrust. For years, and kept her distance, focusing on her duties and staying out of family politics. But once the staff complaints became overwhelming, she made her position clear. She believed the aides, one insider said. All of them. From the beginning. And reportedly lobbied King Charles privately, encouraging him to release the report in full. Her view was simple. The monarchy could not afford another cover-up. If staff were being mistreated, there had to be accountability. She was also particularly disturbed by the HR findings regarding emotional harm and staff turnover. In a private conversation, she was quoted as saying, "This is not who we are supposed to be." Queen Camilla's reaction was more nuanced. She had her own complicated history with the press, having endured years of public hatred following Princess Diana's death. Camilla understood the sting of tabloid cruelty and had initially sympathized with Meghan's struggle to navigate royal life. But over time, her sympathy waned. Reports suggest that Camilla grew increasingly frustrated by Meghan's alleged manipulations and saw the bullying allegations as a betrayal of the palace's internal values. She sided with Charles during the decision to confirm the report's authenticity and supported the controlled release strategy. According to one source, she warned against any attempt to protect Meghan at the expense of institutional integrity. "We've done that before," she reportedly told Charles, "and it nearly destroyed us." But the most fractured relationship was, unsurprisingly, between William and Harry. Their bond, once considered unbreakable, was already damaged following the Oprah interview and Harry's memoir. The report and recordings drove the wedge even deeper. William, now heir to the throne, felt that Harry had not only betrayed the family, but allowed his wife to inflict real harm on those sworn to serve the monarchy. Harry, in turn, saw his brother's stance as cold, unforgiving, and motivated more by image than empathy. Communication between them, already sparse, came to a near halt. Attempts by mutual friends to mediate were rejected. One senior aide described the situation as irreparable. "There's no path forward right now," they said. Not until Harry acknowledges the pain his decisions have caused. Within the extended royal family, opinions varied. The Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, Edward and Sophie, were reportedly caught off guard by the extent of the report's findings. Though they had maintained cordial relations with the Sussexes, especially during public engagements, they expressed quiet concern. Edward, who manages many royal staff matters, was reportedly shaken by the number of HR complaints connected to Meghan's office. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, cousins to Harry and known for being close to both Meghan and him, were said to be conflicted. Eugenie had been one of the few royals who maintained a personal relationship with Meghan post-Megxit. But after the tapes, even she reportedly stepped back, saying privately that she needed time to process what she had heard. There were also tensions brewing among staff. Many who had once worked for the Sussexes felt vindicated by the report's release. They had long lived under a cloud of disbelief, painted by Meghan's defenders as disgruntled or bitter. Now, with documented evidence and public support, they felt seen. But others were less optimistic. Some feared that the royal family's decision to release the report would spark retaliatory moves from Harry and Meghan, another documentary, more interviews, perhaps even legal action. The monarchy, after all, had just broken one of its core rules: never air internal conflicts in public. And yet, King Charles made it clear that the era of silence had ended. By allowing this internal rupture to surface, he signaled a new chapter in royal governance, one where truth, even when painful, would no longer be buried for the sake of appearances. Still, the division remained. In private corridors of Windsor and Balmoral, family members passed each other with strained nods. At events, seating charts were adjusted to avoid awkward encounters. Conversations were cautious. Trust was scarce. The monarchy had survived scandal before. But this was different. This was family. And once a family is divided, no crown, no title, no sense of duty can mend it easily. Meghan Markle's response to the bullying allegations and the subsequent leaked recordings was nothing short of calculated. From the moment the tapes surfaced, the world braced for what was coming next. Would she admit the mistakes, apologize, and attempt to rebuild her fractured image? Or would she double down on her narrative, claiming victimhood and injustice? In typical Meghan fashion, her response was neither straightforward nor predictable. It was a mix of defiance, manipulation, and calculated public relations. Her legal team wasted no time issuing a statement that would become a cornerstone of their defense. They acknowledged the existence of the recordings but insisted they were taken out of context. Meghan, they argued, was a victim of relentless media attacks and misunderstood pressure, and the snippets of her conversations didn't represent her true character. The statement expressed her deep disappointment that private, personal moments had been made public and claimed that the leaked content was only a small piece of a much larger, more complex situation. The timing of the statement was telling. Just hours after the first recording leaked, Meghan posted a photo on her personal Instagram account, a black and white image of her in a quiet, contemplative pose, with no caption. It was her way of controlling the narrative, presenting herself as a calm, collected figure while the media frenzy intensified around her. But it wasn't just a passive response. Meghan's PR machine was in full swing. Within days, a carefully orchestrated media campaign began, designed to cast doubt on the veracity of the recordings. Her team worked tirelessly behind the scenes, reaching out to journalists and reporters who had previously supported her, feeding them stories about how the tapes had been edited to fit a narrative. There were even claims that the audio had been doctored, despite the confirmation from experts that it was authentic. In private, sources close to Meghan insisted that she was deeply hurt by the release of the tapes, claiming that it was part of a broader conspiracy to destroy her and Harry's reputation. "They want us to fail," one anonymous source reportedly told a journalist. "It's been the plan from the beginning." Meghan's supporters rallied around her in droves, either defending her directly or, more subtly, casting blame on the royal family for having aired its dirty laundry in public. On social media, the hashtag #MeghanIsInnocent began trending, with fans of the Duchess sharing personal stories about how Meghan had helped them, inspired them, or made them feel seen. The campaign had all the trappings of a well-coordinated effort to shift public perception in her favor, but it also had a tone of desperation, a desperation that hinted at the looming reality of a PR crisis. Behind the scenes, Meghan's team began to prepare for the inevitable fallout. Crisis management experts were called in, media appearances were lined up, and a special legal team was hired to explore possible actions against the royal family for breach of privacy. According to sources, Meghan's legal advisors were particularly concerned about the potential impact of the tapes on her brand partnerships with major companies like Spotify and Netflix. These deals, worth millions, were at risk if the public turned against her. But Meghan's approach wasn't just reactive, it was proactive. She took to her favorite medium, interviews. Meghan had built much of her reputation on her willingness to speak candidly, and the leaking of the tapes gave her a new platform to control the narrative. Over the course of several weeks, Meghan sat down with trusted journalists, giving them exclusive interviews in which she continued to claim that the recordings did not represent her true self. "I was under immense pressure," she said in one interview. "The royal family is not an easy place to navigate, and I wasn't given the proper support." She explained that, while she regretted the tone she used in some of the interactions, the stress of the role had overwhelmed her. The public's reaction to these interviews was mixed. Some praised her for her honesty and willingness to address the situation head-on. Others, however, saw them as attempts to manipulate public opinion and deflect responsibility. Critics argued that Meghan was still playing the victim card, pointing to the fact that she had yet to take full accountability for her actions. She's painting herself as the victim of a larger conspiracy, but where's the accountability? Asked one columnist. At what point does she acknowledge that her behavior may have hurt people? In the face of growing skepticism, Meghan's response continued to evolve. She began to shift her focus to broader issues, using her platform to discuss mental health, women's empowerment, and the challenges of being a woman of color in a predominantly white institution. These were themes she had championed since her marriage to Harry, but now they seemed more like a strategic pivot, a way to move the conversation away from the tapes and back to her work as an advocate. But Meghan's strategy was not without its flaws. The more she attempted to frame the conversation around her advocacy work, the more it felt like she was deflecting from the issue at hand. It became clear that her public persona was at odds with the version of events presented in the tapes. For many, it was hard to reconcile the calm, confident woman speaking about mental health with the angry, demanding voice captured in the recordings. By now, the media storm surrounding Meghan was reaching a crescendo. Her supporters continued to rally behind her, but the cracks in her defense were becoming more apparent. Meghan's own family, particularly her estranged father, Thomas Markle, began to speak out publicly. In a series of interviews, Thomas made pointed remarks about his daughter's behavior, claiming that she had never been one to accept responsibility for her actions. She's always been quick to blame others, he said. It's always someone else's fault. For Meghan, this was a bitter pill to swallow. Her relationship with her father had been fraught for years, but now his public comments added a layer of complexity to the already challenging media environment. It wasn't just the royal family and palace staff she was up against, it was the entire world, from her own family to the media. Meanwhile, Harry's silence persisted. Though many speculated about his thoughts on the situation, he remained publicly supportive of Meghan, offering vague statements about the need for healing and understanding. But in private, sources claimed that Harry was growing increasingly concerned about the impact the scandal was having on their family. He was caught between two worlds: his loyalty to Meghan, which had always been his driving force, and the mounting evidence that the behavior she was accused. While Meghan's defense continued to unfold, it was becoming clear that her strategy was reaching its limits. The public, ever fickle, was growing tired of the back and forth. The more Meghan tried to defend herself, the more the narrative of her being a difficult royal figure took hold. Her ability to manipulate the media had worked in the past, but now, with the weight of the tapes and the testimonies from former staff members, her words seemed less convincing. By the time the media circus had reached its peak, Meghan had retreated from the public eye. No longer issuing statements or giving interviews, she allowed the dust to settle, hoping that, in time, the storm would pass. But the damage was done. Whether she was guilty of the allegations or simply a victim of circumstance, one thing was clear: Meghan Markle's carefully crafted image had been irrevocably tarnished. Her response had been one of deflection, blame, and a desperate attempt to regain control. But it was no longer enough. The public was no longer buying into her narrative. Meghan Markle, once seen as the royal rebel and the voice of modernity, was now fighting a battle for her reputation that she might not be able to win. When the royal household is at the center of a scandal, it is often the staff, the faceless, nameless individuals who serve behind the scenes, who bear the brunt of the fallout. For years, the public had seen only the polished, controlled appearances of Meghan Markle and the royal family. But behind closed doors, things were far different. The leaked recordings, the palace report, and the growing public backlash have given voice to those who have long remained silent. These are the voices of the people who worked for Meghan and who witnessed firsthand the behavior that many now label as bullying. One former palace aide, who worked closely with the Sussexes during their early years of royal duties, spoke for the first time on record about her experiences. It wasn't just a job, it was a battlefield, she recalled. Meghan was difficult, yes, but it wasn't just the demands. It was the way she treated people. No matter how hard you worked, no matter how much you tried, you were never enough. The aide, who wishes to remain anonymous for fear of professional retaliation, described a culture of fear within the Sussexes' household. There were days when I would wake up in the morning and dread going into work, she said. It wasn't about the hours. It was about the unpredictability. You didn't know if today was going to be the day you got an email with an order to change something last minute. You didn't know if today was the day you'd get yelled at in front of everyone. Another former employee, who had been in charge of managing Meghan's calendar, recounted the constant tension that permeated the work environment. The hours were long, the expectations were sky-high, but that's nothing new in the royal family. What was different was the pressure. There was never any understanding that sometimes things don't go as planned. There was no patience. It was as if everything had to be perfect or else. Perhaps the most striking element of these testimonies was the